Exactly. Right, ready? Very good. Well, welcome everybody to a regular meeting of the Madera County Transportation Commission Policy Board. Today is May 20th. And the first thing we will do is determine a quorum. And why don't we do a roll call vote just to ensure that we have a quorum?
Commissioner Rodriguez,
Here.
Commissioner McCauley, absent. Commissioner Rogers, absent. Commissioner Zachariah.
Here.
Vice Chair Ahmed.
Here.
Chair Poitras.
Yes.
We have quorum.
All right, very good. Thank you. So let's go ahead and start by pledging allegiance to our flag. Yes. Ready, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to public comment. And I would like to first of all read the definition. What that means: this time is made available for comments from the public on matters within the board jurisdiction that are not on the agenda. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. Attention is called. The fact that the board is prohibited by law from taking any substantive action on matters discussed that are not on the agenda, and no adverse conclusions should be drawn if the board does not respond to the public comment at this time. It is requested that no comments be made during this period on items that are on today's agenda. Members of the public may comment on any item that is on today's agenda when that item is called, and should notify the chairperson of their desire to address the board when that agenda item is called. So the first thing I'd like to do is Executive Director Taylor, I believe that you have a announcement regarding public comment or have an item.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Subsequent to the meeting agenda being released, we received a comment from an individual. I have the comment here. I believe you might have been copied as well. We have, we thank you for the comment, and the comments have been noted. And we will be reviewing with legal counsel. However, we do feel that there is not a violation of the Brown Act, and that the agenda has been publicly posted as we have always. And most of the comments also are related to item 10A, which refers to an enclosure. And the staff report is an enclosure, but supporting documentation to a staff report is what is an enclosure, how it's identified. So for right now, we received the comment. It's here for your review if you'd like to see it, and we will be speaking with legal counsel.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. Are there any other comments from the public?
Yes, I have a couple.
Okay.
Regarding the Brown Act. My name is Dan Metz. I'm here on behalf of Sierra Citizens for Sensible Government. I live in Madera County. We question whether today's meeting complies with the Brown Act and whether the public has been provided legally adequate notice. The agenda body states that the MCTC is sitting as 3 organizations: the Transportation Policy Committee, the Madera County Transportation Commission, and the Madera County 2006 Transportation Authority. However, the title of the agenda identifies only one entity, the Madera County Transportation Policy Board, an entity that is not in the body of the agenda and whose status is unclear. The inconsistency is not a trivial drafting issue. The act exists to ensure that the public know who is meeting and what business is to be conducted. The agenda must be clear and not create uncertainty. We also object to the item 10A on the agenda as it is entirely misleading and inadequate. The topic is characterized as an update, reasonably meaning passive information. However, the staff report appears to be seeking policy direction and affirmation of the preferred course of action. An update and a request for direction are not the same thing. In Carlson versus Paradise Unified School District, the court stated that the agenda school site change was inadequate and misleading in that it did not cover the full scope of the board's intended plan to close one school and to transfer students to another. The same principle and conclusion applies to 10A. Also, 10A says there is no enclosure, yet the fact is that there is one. This contradiction further prevents the public from understanding what is before this body. The staff report states that it has received 80 comments in various forums.
Mr. Metz, this wasn't, I believe that with our public comment, you can comment on that item when the item comes up. That was clearly stated in public comment.
This is about the Brown Act and not about the item itself.
Okay, but you were referring to the item 10A, and you were talking about the lack. So you can talk about that item, but talk about that item when it comes up.
I don't believe that's correct.
That is correct.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, you know what? You have your opinion and we have our opinion, but you were talking about not having, there's data there and you're saying it's not being made available.
That's correct.
Okay, so
that's a violation of the Brown Act.
Sir, I may have to ask you to sit down and talk about that item when you can talk about other items that are not on the agenda, but this was on the agenda.
Okay. We know that you received those comments.
Give you 30 more seconds. That was a 3-minute mark.
Accordingly, we request formally that immediate release of all comments received and immediate notice of where they can be reviewed. Inclusion of these comments in the public record for both present and future meetings, and deferment of agenda item 10A until the Brown Act notices are fully satisfied. The public's right to notice, transparency, and informed participation is not a procedural technicality. It is the entire purpose of the Brown Act.
Are there any other comments from the public? Anybody online?
No, Mike.
Okay, very good. Let's go ahead and move on to item number 4. This is MCTC sitting as the Transportation Policy Committee. Transportation consent items. Are there any items on the consent calendar that a commissioner would like to have pulled for further discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I wanted to, if I could, I wanted to pull the item on 4E.
4D, okay. Very good. Let's do that. Are there any other items? And are there any items? Well, let's go ahead and go to that one.
Yes,
And then we'll
thank
go to
you.
the public.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to acknowledge that the commission vision, I appreciate that we are setting the pedal or the pedal to the metal, right? And not only that, I appreciate you acknowledging the passing of 2 former MCTC as a chair and also as an alternate. This was former Chair and Supervisor Max Rodriguez, and also acknowledging our former mayor and alternate here at the MCTC, Santos Garcia. So I thank you for taking that time to acknowledge them, and also highlighting some of the projects that MCTC has taken into account here in the last month here. So thank you again. Appreciate that. That's all I have.
Very good. Thank you very much. And great job on the commission submission. Very good. Thank you. Are there any items that the public would like to have pulled for further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, I will accept a motion for action.
To approve the consent calendar.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, motion carried. Move on to transportation action / discussion items. So the first item would be 5A, the legislative outlook, the governor's state budget, revise, and legislative bill matrix.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Well, it's been a busy couple of months, but especially a busy mid-month, right, Gus? So the governor released the May revise, and with us today is Gus Corey. He's going to kind of highlight some of the areas, the outlook improved, but uncertainty still remains. And he'll touch on the cap and invest. And I think there was even some hearings today related to some of the revenues being generated and whether or not those are coming in lower than expected. But I'm going to allow Gus to go ahead, and he's been spending a lot of time up at the Capitol and attending hearings, and he can share with us what are the impacts in transportation as it relates to the May revise.
Thank you, Director Taylor. Good afternoon, members of the board. Gus Corey, State Legislative Advocate. Pleasure to be with you. Wish I could be there in person. I'll get to that in a little bit. It is high season, as Director Taylor mentioned, with everything going on. Governor Newsom did release the May revise last Thursday, and we got some overwhelmingly good news when it comes to state revenues. So you might remember that in November of last year, the LAO had estimated an $18 billion general fund deficit. In January, the governor said that's more like a $2.9 billion deficit because he was expressing confidence in the stock market. And his confidence has paid off because with the release of the May revise, he says we've basically collected an additional $54 billion since last November, and we have a $39 billion surplus of funding. So he's balancing the budget through the next 18 months. So it covers the balance of 26, 27, and through at least half of 27, 28. And so, for 18 months from now. So the remaining 6 months of this year, and then all of 27 leading into 28. So I think we were all, somewhat surprised. We expected there to be a surplus, but not to that level. And so we're waiting to see what the legislature does with how it impacts transportation programs. The major impact is last year, because there was a deficit, the legislature had pushed some CAL FIRE obligations into the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund of $500 million. So that theoretically comes out. So they should have capacity in order to make good on some of the transit funding commitments that we need in order to comply with our air quality goals and mobility goals and such. But it's gotten a lot more complicated because the revenues have been decreasing. So when we passed Cap and Invest, it was estimated to generate about $4.2 billion, but industry has not wanted to purchase the credits. And that's because the Air Resources Board is in the process of promulgating some proposed amendments to prevent what they deem as leakage. So leakage is where a utility will go and purchase, electricity or get established in another state to kind of skirt California's laws and then provide the electricity so that they're not beholden to some of the stricter emission standards here in the state. So the Air Board was wanting to work on that. It was something that the legislature tried to accomplish when they extended Cap and Invest, but the Air Board's going a step beyond. And so in tandem with that, Governor Newsom wants to give accelerated utility credits back to ratepayers, which we've been doing since 2014, but he's wanting to go above and beyond. And the net impact of this is that you already have a shrinking pie because the utilities are not buying the carbon credits. And now the governor's wanting to use that capacity to give it all the rebates, but it's going to come at the expense of there being no money for transit with the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program. That also includes funding for passenger rail support, for the San Joaquins, for ACE, in the Valley and such. And then for air quality programs, it would wipe out about $250 million for air conformity programs for the Air Pollution Control District. And so it's just a real mess. So Mitch was actually at a budget subcommittee hearing. He testified yesterday on this. The legislature is really in a tight spot here because they need to get a budget to the governor by June 15th. And yet they don't really have certainty over what Cap and Invest is truly going to generate because there's literally an auction today. So they're ballparking about $3 billion, which, if they can't fund any of the transit stuff and they want to do the rebates, which again go above and beyond what we've been doing for the past 12 years. This also could cut into some of the funding for high-speed rail if the pie keeps dipping, because there's other obligations for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And let alone the state still owes us a balance of our Senate Bill 125 funding. This was the one-time money that we got, which was just under $19 million to help us with transit operations and capital needs. And we have not seen the full balance of those funds being committed. So it's just kind of hard when the administration's holding your feet to the fire on, staying the course on addressing air quality goals, but then they're stripping out all the tools, intentionally or unintentionally. That just makes it that much more daunting for us to address mobility within the region. So this is something that we've been talking to our delegation about throughout the valley, working with other regions like the Central Coast, the California Transit Association. There's several that have been weighing in on this. We've spoken to the Pro Tem's office and the Speaker's office about this issue. And so it's been a big three negotiation along with the governor to see what they could do to remedy the situation so that there's more balance when it comes to that. So I'll stop right there and see if folks have any questions on the budget. And then there's just really two bills that I wanted to highlight for your attention that we have a position on.
All right, very good. Any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Gus, so in relation to the SB 125, you talked about TIRSIP. How does that budget now affect, like, for example, our funding?
So there's two ways that this action impacts our funding. So to the extent that there's a current competitive grant that's been issued by CalSTA for cycle 8 of TIRSIP. That's a $1.1 billion program. A large portion, almost half the program, is funded by the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. If they use that capacity, that program is going to get cut in half. So that makes it harder to expand, let alone maintain existing service for passenger rail. With the 125 funding, the frustration is that's not even being appropriated yet for this fiscal year. But you may recall last year when we came on board to support Cap and Invest, we were sold on the notion that, hey, if we extend the program, there's going to be market stability. There will be a surplus of funding. So we'll be able to augment these programs. This is the polar opposite of what we were promised. And so if you guys don't get your 125, funding, I would defer to our transit operators. But, I'm sure that's not going to be able to help because some folks are baking that into their projections for other grants or for their operating, just to kind of get through, the next, couple years. And so the legislature still owes about $700 million of the 5.1 program. And I don't even think we've received our full balance of our share of the 4.4 billion. And so I have to double check what that number is. But I think in the aggregate, it was like $18.8 million is what we're due collectively from SB 125.
Thank you, Gus. It just, highlight that, obviously as operation costs continue to go up, obviously we depend on a lot of that money. So for us, I think it's very imperative that we get that. I know we have to plan for long term, but nevertheless, SB 125 certainly are dollars that we need not only in the county, but in our cities. So thank you. Appreciate you highlighting that. Yeah,
I had just, Mr. Chair, I had a pretty good conversation last night with Assemblymember Soria about this issue. So she gets it. She's fighting. We were talking to other delegation members, but that was the most recent conversation I had just last night was with her.
Very good. All right. I guess probably have all our questions. Go ahead and go on.
Yeah. So just two quick ones I'm happy to answer any questions on any bill that we have in the matrix. So the Assembly Appropriations Committee had met last week to kind of weed through some bills, and they took care of quite a few of them. There were some bills that were in the policy committees that didn't get heard on suspending the gas tax, which we clearly can't afford. We have to leverage our sales tax measure against state resources to make safety improvements on 99, on 41 and beyond. And so those went away, but there's two that we're eyeballing really closely. So the first one, it's the big four MPOs are sort of the sponsor of is Senate Bill 1087. So what this bill would do is modernize Senate Bill 375. This is the program where we have to put together a sustainable community strategy, which takes inventory of our mobility needs, our housing needs, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, vehicle miles traveled, and it's a prerequisite to us applying for some of the competitive programs that the state has to offer. So the legislation is trying to provide more flexibility, push out the duration. Right now, we have to prepare that plan every 4 years. It's pushing it out to 8 years. It's trying to level set and get away from a one size fits all perspective or mandate on the greenhouse gas target setting. So there's going to be regional advisory groups that take in our factors. Like, Madera is very diverse. I mean, we have a mountainous community where, we're in the valley too, and there's just different travel patterns and density that has to be considered as these targets are being promulgated. And so the bill puts an emphasis on that. It does away with some of the other planning documents to save us some money, so that you're not having to have a duplicative process on things, which I know staff, will appreciate. So that bill is currently still sitting on the Senate floor, and it should get off by the end of next week. And then once it gets to the assembly, we expect a little bit more tweaking. We just want to make sure that ARB still retains the target setting authority, and they want targets for 2045. And the Valley as a whole has been having a hard time even meeting the 2030 targets. And so we just want to be more intentional about what those targets are going to look like. And when they talk about taking inventory of all traffic, I mean, clearly it's not just Maderans that are using the state routes, whether you're going to Yosemite or if it's goods movement traffic on 99, that's not stuff that we're generating. We're helping everyone else is driving through our backyard. And so if I just want to be cautious about if the targets are higher, then the remedy has to be fit the ailment where they need to put some money behind it. We clearly can't fund it. These are state assets that we're trying to address. Also, we don't own 99. We don't own the 41. I mean, so the state really has to be a partner here. So, we're looking very intently at this because we want to remain competitive with getting state funding to take care of our infrastructure needs. So that's 1087. And just very quickly on AB 2168. So this bill is a little bit problematic. What it does is the intention is to try to incentivize counties that program more of their STIP capacity, the State Transportation Improvement Program. It's one of the only flexible programs that you guys have funded through the gas tax where we can invest into multimodal things. And that's kind of where we say, hey, like our highway stuff, if it's rail, we put it into the STIP, and we have that go through the California Transportation Commission. So what the author wants to do, and it's Buffy Wicks, who's from Oakland, she wants to try to get more counties to program more active transportation projects. Well, in a small county like ours, we only have a finite capacity to program anything to begin with, and ATP might not be the most prudent thing just in the STIP, or if we have some, it might come at the expense of other safety projects and such. And if we don't do it, it makes us less competitive for getting the active transportation grants. So I feel like it disadvantages rural communities, smaller counties. And so we have an opposed position on it, and we'll be working on that bill as it migrates over to the Senate. We'll speak to Senator Caballero's office about that one. It does have one provision in there that's good, though, and that's the bill would open up the active transportation program to funding things like safe routes to school. There just aren't very many places that you can go to get money for safe routes to school. So that seems like a prudent thing to give more flexibility on the eligibility, but just not to hamstring you on forcing you to program so much of your money for just this one particular mode. So I'll stop right there, Mr. Chair. Happy to answer any questions or comments that you or board members may have.
Yes, Executive Director.
Just for point of clarification, this is 2168 Wicks.
Correct.
Okay. Just want to draw your attention to our package. Our package on page 23 does say a support position, but it's an opposed position. So for right now, at first we were supporting it until some of the language changed and some of the write-ups correct. So it will be an opposed position. We're not taking any action today, but just for your.
Well, Director Taylor, and I apologize. I guess technically if they stripped out that portion, if they want to leave in the eligibility for the safe routes, that's fine. And they struck out the other portion on forcing you to program your STIP, that would be okay. But I don't know if she's going to go there. So it's up to you guys if you want to support if amended, or if we just do a straight oppose. It's up to you on that one.
So my recommendation is to oppose at this time for that particular fund source.
Any other questions? I have a question as regards, going back to 1087, you mentioned that the bill recommends an advisory committee to take a look at some of the plans. Who would the advisory committee be made up of? I mean, would it be the Strategic Growth Council or some of those people? I mean, would it be a group who would be assembled in the spirit of what 1087 is about, or would they, who are they?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here, let me get into the bill real quick, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, and I'll give you some specificity on that.
That's pretty key. It's
It really is. Give me one sec here. I can't remember how specific it was on that front.
and I'm feel free to get back later on. I don't
Yeah,
need to right now. Get back whenever you can take a look at it. I'm just curious.
but your point's well taken. I think I kind of know where you're going here. We want to make sure that the committee's emblematic of those communities that are impacted and that we have a say so that there's it's really like, say, a Madeira perspective. It's not a state perspective that just say, oh yeah, well, we're going to force you guys into these targets, which we clearly can't attain. I mean, not to put words in your mouth, but
Right.
that's been kind of our concern all along is someone else is making up the rules and force feeding us solutions that we can't really attain.
Right. Yeah, we see a lot of that, as you know, out of Sacramento, and people thinking that they know what's best for us, and so it would be good if we had, represent. And it also depends on the groups represented too. I mean, there could be local groups, but they're also not who I would say are favorable of projects, and again, might be um, people in place who would just continue the same mindset. So, yeah. Anyway, that's my question.
Yeah, I'll get that information to you. Sorry, I didn't recollect that off the top of my head.
Problem. Any other questions? Any members of the public have any questions in regards to Gus's report? Nobody online. Okay, very good.
So, Mr. Chair, I think, Gus, would you like to
Oh.
provide some additional information?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Director Taylor. So, pretty excited to announce that beginning on June 1st, I've accepted an opportunity to become a partner at another leading lobbying firm in town, Actum, which in Latin means action. So it's headed up by my former boss, Assembly Speaker Fabian Nunez. He was Speaker of the Assembly back in the early 2000s. He actually hired me to be on the Assembly Transportation Committee way back when. And it's just a great opportunity to work with the firm. They have offices in Sacramento, Los Angeles, New York, DC, London. So we'll have quite a few resources over there. For some of the other partners, Mick Mulvaney, former Chief of Staff to President Trump and Budget Director, Barbara Boxer, LaFonza Butler, two U.S. senators. And so there's a lot of high caliber people over there. It's a nonpartisan firm, which I really like. And they don't do as much transportation. So I think that was appealing to them, transportation, local government. And they do just a whole host of things, communications and consulting, polling, all sorts of stuff. So I think it just allows me to expand, a little bit more and work with people that I've respected for a really long time. And so I'd be honored to continue the relationship with the MCTC, and nothing would change from a practical perspective. I would still continue to be your advocate. I'm just hoping that it would be a win-win situation across the board for getting others to kind of carry the water. I mean, I've had the absolute privilege of having my own firm for 13 years and having people on board like Mitch, and but I think you get older, you get a family, and and the whole bit, and so we all strive for a little bit of balance, and so this was sort of a win-win to work with high caliber people, and it'll allow me to focus a lot more intently on strategy and, just interfacing with my clients. So I'm excited about the opportunity.
All right, very good. Any questions about that?
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
So, Mr. Chair, we will be working with Gus with the merger and transition moving forward. So it'll be in our next meeting agenda.
Very good. All right, if there's no other questions, let's go ahead and move on to item 5B. Speaking of a transition, we have the new Roy transitioned into that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Okay, so as we heard in the last item, we heard a lot about Senate Bill 125, the transit program. And over the past few years, it has been providing funding to support improvements to transit systems statewide. And as we also heard, Madera County is expected to receive about 18 million over the next 4 fiscal years to support transformative transit projects in our region. So since 2024, the local transit agencies have been receiving allocations that are going towards projects that have been approved by this board and also by CalSTED. And so to answer the question that was asked earlier, yes, the first allocation that we received in 2024 was the full allocation set for that year 1 funds. The second year allocation that we received was short the zero emission transit capital program portion of the funds. And I also have information about what each agency has received so far, if you need to hear that. But moving on, I just want to say that MCTC also has an important role in this process, which is why this item is being brought to you today. As part of this program and to remain eligible for ongoing funding, MCTC, as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, is required to use 1% of the funding that it receives from this program to administer the program and also to develop a one-time long-term transit financial plan for the region. So this plan is due to CalSTA by June 30th of 2026. And so over the past several months, we've been working closely with Nelson Nygaard, which is a transit consulting firm, as well as our local transit agencies to meet this requirement. So during this informational item, we wanted to share with the board the plan's major findings. And then next month, we'll bring the final plan for approval on consent to this board. So with that, I'll turn it over to Derek Chia, who is associate principal with Nelson Nygaard, to help walk us through the major portions of the plan.
Sure. Thank you, Natalia, for the introduction. And thank you, Mr. Chair and board members, for the opportunity to be here to, as Natalia said, share some initial findings and recommendations from our analysis of the county's transit agencies and their financial performance to date and into the future. So if I may get started and provide a brief overview of what the plan is, what we're hoping to accomplish with the plan, and how we actually go about achieving those goals. So as I think as we're all aware, Senate Bill 125 guides the distribution of state funding through the TRSIP and ZETSIP programs. And in doing so, it establishes accountability requirements for recipients, including this long-term financial plan. The legislation specifies 2 key components of that plan. It requires agencies to identify and develop ridership retention and recovery strategies following the COVID pandemic, as well as develop a 5-year forecast of operating funding requirements. So that's the policy context, but beyond really beyond compliance with state legislation, this is also an opportunity for Madera County to start rethinking about how, the role that transit plays in the overall transportation system, how it can better meet the needs of its residents and constituents. And so with that, the question that we really sought to answer through this work is, are there enough resources to meet sort of currently identified needs and priorities, things like converting to zero emission buses as mandated by state law, while also delivering on sort of broader mobility and other regional goals? And if not, how should our needs and priorities be? How can we best meet those needs and priorities with a constrained set of resources? And so, we developed this plan in 3 phases. First, we did a deep dive into the historical data from that transit agencies and MCTC provided to develop really a baseline understanding of how transit is performing and operating today. What we did from there was that we used the historical data that we analyzed, as well as peer comparisons, as well as best practice from across the state and across the country to identify a range of strategies to grow ridership per SB 125 and improve financial sustainability. And what we did was evaluated them at a very high level against performance metrics that were tied to performance goals and desired outcomes. From there, we took the historical financial data that agencies and MCTC provided and attempted to develop a financial forecast into the future, measuring performance against a range of scenarios that reflect different investment choices and potential operating environments and conditions. And so if we move on into the key findings from the plan, we'll start with where the transit system is at today. And so what this slide is showing is that ridership, this slide shows ridership broken down by the 3 different agencies, as well as different transit service provided by each agency. And across the board, really, we saw a sharp decline during the pandemic, bottoming out into a valley in circa 2021, 2022, followed by a gradual recovery through 2024, which is the most recent year for which we have data available. The pace and the completeness of that recovery over the past few years has really varied by agency and service type. So Madera Metro Bus is the highest ridership service or system in the county. It has also had the fastest recovery among the various service providers and modes. Next, if we flip the script to look at operating expenses, what we see here is that operating expenses over the past several years have been steadily increasing due to rising service costs. So you see here that, especially in the early 2020s, 2021 through 2023, there was a steep increase there. And this chart shows the breakdown of operating costs by the same breakdown of agency and service provided. We'll also note that capital expenditures and revenues, which aren't shown here, but we'll get into in a little bit, they're more volatile year to year for a number of reasons that Gus covered earlier. I think touched on quite a few of those reasons for uncertainty and volatility in capital and discretionary funding. But broadly speaking, while operating costs have increased steadily year over year, the transit agencies have remained mostly financially stable over this period, and that is attributable to a large influx of one-time COVID-era discretionary funds through the CARES Act and similar legislation at the state and federal level to support transit operations and select capital projects. If we move on to sort of where the biggest capital needs are for the county's 3 transit agencies, that sits in the vehicles. And why is that? A large share of current vehicles across the 3 transit agencies has exceeded or is approaching their useful life benchmark, which is a threshold set by the FTA. So you can see here that Madera County, almost 3/4 or just about 3/4 of the vehicles at the time of our analysis were at or exceeded their ULB. The city of Chowchilla, on the other hand, a much smaller agency, but still 3 out of their 5 or 60% of their vehicles were at or beyond their ULB. So all this paints a picture of there's been a fair amount of change and uncertainty over the past several years. There's clearly a need for investment in the system, particularly on the vehicles front. Where do we go from here? And so if you'll recall, the second step of our planning process was to identify and evaluate at a high level strategies to recover, grow, and retain ridership, as well as to improve financial sustainability for the transit agencies. And so what we took into account when sort of developing and evaluating these strategies was a number of criteria or topic areas, such as customer experience and ridership, the level of interagency coordination that would be required or could be generated, as well as deliverability concerns such as timeline and ease of implementation. And broadly speaking, what we're presenting here are some of the top performing strategies that balance, cost effectiveness with impacts or benefits to riders and or agencies. There are a few other ways of sort of breaking down the strategies that we haven't presented here for the sake of brevity. But there are other sort of angles such as high cost versus low cost strategies, quick wins or fast, easy to implement versus things that maybe have a longer lead time. But for here, we'll focus on two themes, which are quick wins for riders and working better together as agencies. So, going back to the quick wins for riders, what are some examples that we've learned from speaking with the agencies, as well as sort of leveraging best practice findings from across the state and across the country. Bus stop improvements, things like safety and amenity improvements. If we look at our neighbors to the south in Fresno County, lights and cameras, they've been installing many of those that have increased riders' perceived safety at a low cost. We heard a lot from agency staff that riders, both existing ones as well as potential ones, just aren't really aware of the full range of transit options that are available to them. And so, thinking about how we can work together to really get the word out through marketing, through education, through awareness, and communications, thinking about ways that we can do that in the short term. That's another quick win. And if we look at an example from Durango, Colorado, which is about the same population as Chowchilla, they undertook a new branding campaign, and that really resulted in improved community awareness and visibility of the full range of transit options that they have on offer in their city. On the sort of service delivery front, oftentimes when you're thinking about, service improvements or just in general how you attract ridership is by increasing service. That comes at immense cost. And so there are smaller ways that you could, work better together as agencies to think about where the overlaps are, where routes meet, and how we can sort of improve things like time transfers and schedule coordination without increasing service hours and therefore operating costs. On the flip side, there are also ways that we identified that the three agencies in the county could work better together. Again, hearing from agency staff, as well as thinking about examples and case studies that we've drawn on from other parts. On the first, we've heard that, grant funding and discretionary funding in general is competitive. Our agencies are small in size and therefore less visible. So what can we do there? Well, we've had examples where agencies have successfully sort of coordinated or joined forces to apply for grants together. And what that does is really elevate the profile and the total ask that we're making, and overall making our applications more visible. We could also streamline procurement across agencies. There is going to be a massive push to renew and electrify the transit fleets. And so if we look to the south, Omnitrans in San Bernardino, they benefited really from having a state joint procurement process for their electric bus procurement. And not only did that save them cost, it also saved on agency time, which we know that agencies are short on here as well. So 6 months of saving, sort of saving 6 months in the timeline to procure those vehicles through the joint process. And finally, I touched on this earlier, but thinking about service coordination, there's a whole spectrum of possibility here, from these simple schedule adjustments to make for time transfers at certain locations, and coordinating better with regional providers. But they're also sort of at the higher end of the spectrum. They're also sort of more involved consolidation and coordination opportunities there. And that would require some further study. But if we take a couple of examples, Stanislaus County up the road, as well as Sonoma County, they've undertaken sort of integration, efficiency, and consolidation studies recently. And what we found from those agencies that have undertaken some level of consolidation is that they've been able to meaningfully increase the number of service hours that they're providing without a net increase in operating costs. And so that's the overwhelming finding we have from various agencies that have explored and implemented some of these coordination and consolidation options. If we move into the financial analysis component of our plan, the big takeaway here is that all three agencies were forecasting that operations will be able to be sustained with fare and formula revenue alongside remaining one-time COVID-era discretionary funding through at least fiscal year 2030, and possibly beyond for the cities of Madera and Chowchilla. And so what we did to inform this analysis was build a baseline financial forecast through fiscal year 2035 based on the data that were provided to us by the three transit agencies as well as MCTC. So we considered historical cost and revenue data by category or type or source, and adjusted those to account for inflation based on federal inflation indices, as well as population growth in the case of certain revenues. We incorporated ongoing and programmed capital spending, things like fleet renewal and electrification, things that we know and or agencies have submitted to us as known or planned expenditures, as well as the ongoing microtransit studies that the county and the city are undertaking and have provided sort of initial ballpark cost estimates. So I'd like to emphasize that we developed this forecast based on historical data, and so it's as complete and reflective of the historical data that we've been able to receive. You'll see that the solid lines are reflective of costs, and the dotted lines are reflective of revenues. And so the solid lines for the county and the city of Madera in particular, those are the ones that are really shooting upwards into the latter half of this decade and the first half of the 2030s. What we're seeing there is really driven by massive increases in the county and the city's operating budgets due to significant increases in third-party operating contractor costs. So contracting out the operations of the transit vehicles and system to third-party operators, the costs for those are increasing significantly. In some cases, by 2035, we'll be at double that their costs in FY25 or 26. If we think back to some of the strategies that we identified, this is an example of the impact of some of those strategies. So the blue or the gray indicates the baseline. This is an illustrative example for the county. And the blue lines indicate what happens when you actually, if you were to actually implement some of them. And so the big takeaway here is that, the strategies to grow, retain, or recover ridership, those drive agency financial performance by influencing fare revenue. However, given the small share of agencies' budgets that fare revenue accounts for, typically on the order of 2 to 3%, even if you're massively moving the needle on ridership through sort of increased service hours and all of those interventions that I was mentioning earlier, we're not necessarily moving the needle dramatically on financial performance, just given how little of agencies' budgets are made of by fares. And finally, I mentioned that we're going to touch a little bit on the capital side. This chart shows, as an example, the county's capital expenditures and revenues historically, year over year, in the past 6 years. And what this highlights is just how volatile and uncertain some of this funding is. Contrast that with fleet electrification and renewal, which is a huge capital need for all three agencies, committing or planning for or committing to almost millions of dollars, several millions of dollars of expenses in the coming years to fully renew and electrify fleets in an uncertain and volatile discretionary funding environment. And so there are risks there. However, some of the strategies that we had proposed earlier, and we'll get to those in sort of the closing recommendations, could help put agencies in a better position to succeed, and sort of see through the investments that they have planned out and will require. The last thing that I'll mention that isn't shown on this chart is that we have taken into account also the recent passage of the most recent Measure T sales tax revenue. The expenditure plan for that dedicates an increased share of funding for transit operators, as well as increases the amount of funding that has been set aside for roadway projects. And so there's a two-pronged effect here. Not only has the sort of share of transit funding been increased, but also with the amount of funding available for roadway and other safety projects being increased, that reduces or that has a potential to free up additional LTF funds or local transportation funds that have typically been diverted or sort of used flexibly between roadway and transit to be rededicated to transit. And so we've sought to capture some of this in our financial forecasts, but given the overall sort of uncertainty and volatility of this, there's still question marks as to how much and when said funding will be available, as Gus was mentioning earlier. And so if we move into the recommendations part to close, what we sought to do here is really think about how we can give agencies the best chance to succeed. We know a fair amount about where sort of operating expenses and where operating costs and capital costs will be trending in the next several years to a decade. We're less certain about what the funding outlook will be. And so, what can we do in the face of that? The first, on the rider side or in the rider experience front, how can we recover, retain, and grow ridership in a sustainable and measured way, given this funding uncertainty? That's by focusing on these, quick implementation, fairly low-cost strategies, rather than sort of big commitments to increasing service hours or sort of transforming how transit service is delivered or provided throughout the region. We know that the microtransit studies are in progress, and those could result in, we haven't, since the studies are still in progress, we haven't fully considered sort of how they might impact the fare revenue or ridership front, but we know that they'll come at somewhat significant cost, and that's all fair, and that's subject to the microtransit studies themselves. But beyond those, there are quicker wins that we can accomplish over the next 1 to 3 years that we think could make a meaningful change in ridership on our transit agencies. More on the capital planning and procurement front, there are ways that agencies can work better together that I've teased or that I've mentioned earlier. So whether that's thinking about, putting together joint or coordinated funding applications to elevate agencies' visibility, whether that's thinking about, aligning your capital program with agency priorities and budget constraints. That's what agencies have already been doing. Continue doing that, and then finally, thinking about ways that we can procure our capital needs together to benefit from economies of scale. Finally, the sort of the big ticket item among this list of recommendations here is, continuing to explore and study opportunities to think about ways that we can work better together on delivering service or delivering an operating service on the street. We've heard that there are areas of overlap among our three agencies. We've heard that there are areas of overlap between one of our agencies and that of neighboring counties, whether it's Merced or Fresno. So thinking about ways that we can streamline those, coordinate and or consolidate those. And what that will really do is, typically we find, as I said, we keep costs steady and really allow service hours and or levels to increase meaningfully without that change in operating budget. And so with that, I'll leave it there. And thanks for your time, and happy to take any questions or comments.
Very good.
Yes, I do have a question, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes.
Derek, Natalia, thank you for the presentation. Derek, I know the term consolidation, although it hasn't really been circulating around our agencies, but coordination certainly is. As you mentioned, the overlap areas, we can certainly work on that. Now, given the fares that, like, for example, in the city of Madera, the Metro, that's a zero fare, and, it's free pretty much, but
Right.
yet our ridership hasn't increased given that it's free, right? So something's not happening there. And I understand you mentioned a couple of the other things that we can implement, whether it's safe lights and what have you. But I would think that a transit service like what we have should be gaining more ridership, and yet it seems like it's gradual. And maybe COVID did something different with ridership. As far as the county goes, there's a $2 fare. So therefore, I see less of a ridership. So do you think that maybe the fact that they're adding an additional fare down the road is going to increase ridership or possibly hurt our ridership in the future?
That's a great question. We didn't get to go under the hood in terms of sort of service or fares too much as part of this study. But I think, in general, what we do know that, going fare free as Madera Metro did in recent years does lead to a ridership bump. Sort of what the magnitude of that increase is sort of depends on several contextual factors. I think ultimately, even if service is free, if there are other elements of the service that don't meet the needs or trip making patterns of potential riders, it still won't be a viable option. And so, broadly speaking, yes, I think there is potential to sort of further think, how, whether it's the city or the county could adjust or increase or otherwise improve just the service they're putting out there. So things like frequency, span of service, or how long the service operates, and the routes that it operates. We did not sort of do an in-depth study there into sort of where these gaps may be. I know the county does regular unmet needs studies into sort of the major gaps in transit service that riders are experiencing, and so I think that would be a critical first part in sort of picking up if we're going to undertake maybe a slightly more ambitious rethink of how transit service is delivered, that unmet need study and or further going out and hearing from individual riders sort of where they're at, what their current trip making patterns are, and how what improvements would drive them to use transit more. that would be a good first step in thinking about, okay, what is the overall picture beyond fares that would compel riders to ride the bus more often.
Thank you, Derek. Yeah, and I know that we're exploring the micro transit, and that's happening amongst the city. I'm assuming that the county may be doing the same, but I do know that we serve two different users. You know, obviously we have more urban,
Right.
and you have rural, so I don't know how that consolidation would, I mean, how you would see that, but I'm sure coordination, especially in areas of overlap, I think that would be something that we certainly can agree on. But I mean, those assessments still yet to be brought before us so that we can see how that would benefit the ridership or the region. That's all I
Right.
have.
Very
Yeah, and
good.
I think, or sorry, if I may just make one further comment. I think another opportunity for thinking about integration or coordination is at the more regional level. We've heard that there are, plenty of residents in the county who take trips to neighboring counties and urban centers, Fresno and Merced in particular. We know that there is some service that I think the county provides into Fresno or into Merced, and vice versa. And so thinking about ways to sort of streamline that and, make, whether it's, align schedules better on sort of those inter-county connections to provide a broader schedule coverage, or thinking about diverting and, opening up new routes or service possibilities to connect new dots in the map. I think those are also possibilities.
All right, very good. Commissioner.
Yeah, so Derek, I mean, so our report is coming out, and I know our initial numbers were coming at $40 to $60 per trip is what it costs for our average riders. And we're going to get a recommendation to probably reduce our buses to look at the micro transit. And it seems like the report that you had seems to keep the buses as a recommendation. Is the state not recommending, since it's going to be so costly to electrify our fleet, that microtransit might be a better way to avoid the cost of buying these new buses as a city or entity?
It could be. That's certainly, I think that's certainly a valid possibility. We so far in our dialogue with agencies, we've heard that agencies are currently still planning for fleet electrification. However, what we've also heard sort of elsewhere in the state is that, this fleet electrification mandate is a huge burden on agencies financially, big or small, urban or rural. And it's massive cost, whether your fleet is, 5 vehicles or hundreds of vehicles. And so, I think I'm starting to hear at least, murmurs of like, what we can do to sort of potentially rethink this legislation and make it work for transit agencies that are, facing massive financial uncertainty. However, I don't think anything concrete is on the table yet. But I will say that, microtransit could be a reasonable alternative if that, if a third party will be coming in with and, assuming all of the capital costs and risks associated.
Thank you.
All right, very good. So, Talia, where do we go from here?
Okay. Well, I wanted to provide a brief update on the allocations that we received so far. So if you recall, back in November of 2023, that's when this board approved a suite of projects for each jurisdiction that went for approval before this board, and then CalSTA did approve those projects. So starting in year one, San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority, which was for the Madera Transit Station Relocation Project, it received, so far it's received 10.4 million out of the 12.8 million it was that was approved to receive. Madera County was approved to receive 3.5 million. And so far it has received or is in the process of receiving 1.4 million. So that was, so through year two, that has been the allocation. Also Chowchilla in year two has received 671,000 out of the 1.7 that it is slated to receive. So we're still waiting, as Gus mentioned, we're not sure if we're going to get the remaining portions of the allocations that we're set to receive. The city of Madera was slated to receive allocations in year 3. So hopefully we're kind of in the middle of year 3, so we'll see if we get that allocation, but they're slated to receive 500,000 for their approved projects. Like I mentioned before, for year 2, our allocation was short. And that was because we did not receive any of the zero emission transit capital program portion of the funds. So I hope that helps clarify what we've been receiving so far through this program. And we're hopeful that we will continue receiving the allocations, even if they are a little bit late.
Mr. Chair, if I may ask a question, I'm not sure if this is specifically for transit, but did we get any of that money cut for the proposed station, the SB $125? Was there
That's for the SJJPA that she referred to. It's the relocation of the Amtrak
correct?
station.
But was there any money held back?
She was mentioning that 10 million was provided out of the 12 million.
Yeah, so the first year they were supposed to receive about 8.2 million. They received that in full because we did receive our full allocation. The next allocation was supposed to be in year 2. I think they were supposed to receive about 4 million-ish to make up that full 12, but they didn't because we were short of the funding we were supposed to receive in year 2. We wanted to make sure that our local agencies got as much as they could possibly get since we had a shortfall. And so they only received about 2 million of the 4 million that they were supposed to receive in year 2. Yeah.
Thank you.
So the amount that you're maybe referring to that we did not receive is the federal funding for the high-speed rail
Thank you.
station. We did not.
Yes, that was being cut back. Thank you. For some reason, SB
50 million.
125 came in. Yes, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Mr. Chair, that's all I have.
Very good, thank you. Any other questions from the commissioners? How about the public? Any questions? Seeing and hearing none, nobody on board. So very good. Well, thank you very much for that great information. And so I think everybody, all the agencies have their marching orders. Very good. So let's go ahead and move on to MCTC sitting as the Madera County Transportation Commission. And item 6 is to reaffirm all actions taken while sitting as a Transportation Policy Committee.
To reaffirm all actions.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, motion carried. Let's move on to item number 7. This is administrative consent items. And are there any items on the consent calendar? Administrative consent calendar, they would say have pull for further discussion. How about members of the public? Anything on there you'd like to have pull for discussion? Seeing and hearing none, I'll accept a motion for action.
Move to approve the consent calendar.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, motion carried. Moving on now to MCTC sitting as the Madera County 2006 Transportation Authority. There are no consent items, and so we'll move on to item 10A. Roy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Or wiser.
I guess you call that right. This item is an informational update on the Measure T renewal implementing guidelines. As you know, the draft renewal implementing guidelines were released for a 30-day public review period, and a public hearing was held at the board's April 22nd meeting. We received a number of comments, primarily from 2 individuals. Staff is currently conducting a thorough review of all comments to determine whether they can reasonably be incorporated into the guidelines. As context for that review, I want to briefly reiterate the framework established by the voter-approved measure. The renewal measure is a citizen initiative that includes both an ordinance and an expenditure plan approved by the voters. Under the ordinance, the authority is directed to establish implementing guidelines to, quote, carry out its responsibilities to implement the expenditure plan, end quote. The expenditure plan also states that, quote, each jurisdiction shall have the flexibility to allocate funds based on the unique needs of its communities. And just for clarification purposes, jurisdictions refer to the County of Madera, City of Madera, and City of Chowchilla. The expenditure plan then identifies a broad range of eligible uses, including road repair, constructions of streets, roads, and bridges, storm damage repair, storm drainage, and other related transportation projects. In addition, the plan states that funds may be used for regional or transit projects as defined in the plan at the discretion of the jurisdiction. Accordingly, staff's review of the comments will be evaluated in the context of and against the language contained in the voter-approved expenditure plan. To generally address at this time some of the comments, we received some comments regarding the regional streets program. The current draft guidelines establish a process and requirements for allocating regional program funds. They also indicate that a strategic implementation plan will be developed following approval of the guidelines. That strategic implementation plan will provide additional detail regarding the policies, procedures, and overall administration of their regional projects program. Lastly, we received comments concerning the forms included in the appendix. Those administrative forms are intended to support local jurisdictions in meeting planning and reporting requirements and will ultimately be incorporated into an administrative manual. That manual will be developed concurrently with their strategic implementation plan. At this time, staff anticipates returning to the board on June 17th with a revised draft of the implementing guidelines for the board's consideration and approval. We also plan to include a response to comments document summarizing the comments received and staff's responses. I'd be happy to answer any questions or receive any direction to move forward.
Very good.
Yes. Troy, can you highlight the regional portion of that expenditure plan? You touched on, if any, at the discretion of the agencies. Can you expand on that, please?
So the regional project program receives 14.5% of the allocation. And as you know, in the expenditure plan, there is not a list of projects. It will rely on the projects that will be listed in the regional transportation plan or sustainable community strategy. Sorry about that. And so the jurisdictions will have the option to essentially apply for allocations from that program for a quote unquote regional project. That's how the guidelines have been set up to allow the jurisdiction flexibility of what quote unquote regional project they would like to implement and then request funds from that program to implement that project.
Thank you, Troy. And one of the, and I get that for jurisdictions to state or they would state that this would be considered a regional project, therefore this would be on the list. Now, assuming that there is a regional project where the jurisdiction's allocations, I think there was some language in some of the comments there stating that this regional allocation can take from jurisdictions, but there is a process by which that has to happen. And I was hoping you would.
Yeah, so anything, any allocation from any program would be subject to a public review process and put into an annual budget plan, and then ultimately into an annual work program that would be go out for public review and consideration by this board for any approval before any dollars are spent on any projects would receive those funds. And so,
I was just going to say thank you, because that was work done by the oversight committee at the same time with this expenditure plan to be able to make sure that everything was transparent moving forward with this new measure, T measure. Just want to make sure.
Yeah. And so there would be a transparent process to have a public review process of any project to receive that is planned to receive funding. They would publish the list, and then we would then have a reporting requirement at the end after money is spent. What did they spend the actual funds on for that project? And then they report on any other performance measures or indicators or anything to support those expenditures. And so that would hopefully answer your question.
Thank you, Troy. Appreciate it. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Any other questions, comments from the commission? Now we'll open it up to the public. Any comments from the public regarding item 10A? Very good. Seeing her. Okay.
Some comments. We're just waiting for one rather. Who's going to go first?
Okay, well, I was looking for somebody to move and didn't see anybody move.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Uribe, and I'm a policy advocate for Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on item 10A during today's meeting, and thank you to the MCTC staff members who have met with us to discuss the guidelines and listen to community input. These guidelines are presented for adoption because Madeiran voters were sold a measure that would address their local transportation needs. Consequently, MCTC staff members and commissioners have the responsibility to ensure the implementing guidelines respond to the needs of Madeirans. The draft released on April 8th does not do this. As noted within the staff report for this item, staff received more than 80 comments. Recently, he mentioned that a lot of them came from 2 individuals. I'm assuming one of those is myself. However, I would like to add on that the comment letter I submitted was also signed by the Framing Community and Friends board members. They submitted their signature as well, various Slovenia community members, and also Dan Metz, who's also here today. So as I go through these comments, please know that they're not coming independently from my opinions. These are comments that I'm elevating from work with communities. These comments show interest from the community and highlight the authority's responsibility to Madeirans. Madeirans deserve to see the comments submitted by their neighbors and to see their requests not just noted, but incorporated into the implementing guidelines. We ask for a second release of the guidelines to track what was incorporated and a release of submitted public comments. Within our engagement through meetings with staff, comments at the public hearing, and community meetings with residents and staff members, we have submitted input that asks for increased accountability, enforceable policy requirements, performance metrics, and oversight measures to ensure local revenues are used accordingly. Among our full list of requests, the following are included. Include a project eligibility criteria and performance indicators to guide the prioritization of projects for each funding program. We remind you that MCTA has the authority and discretion to establish clear guidelines as to how funds can be used to ensure revenues are used according to voter intent. Require community participation to guide and develop jurisdiction projects list. This should be done through 3 public meetings, workshops each fall. That way staff has time to incorporate these into the annual budgets. Jurisdictions should be required to post the public notices and project information on their websites and social media accounts. Include an interactive map to track spending, location, and funds for each project funded by Measure T. And funds from local streets and roads programs may be used for the regional program only if local streets and roads, which are used as access roads to disadvantaged communities, are classified as good. And edits to the working disadvantage to the definition of disadvantaged communities eligible for the 10% set aside to rely on the definition of the established by environmental justice elements that have either been adopted or are still in review. And we hope the full extent of our comments are considered and the Madeirans are able to see their priorities reflected in the guidelines. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to comment. And thank you to staff for all of their hard work in putting all of this stuff together. We really appreciate that. Because there was a little back and forth between the chairman and I'm afraid that some of our comments may have been lost. So I'm going to loop back on the Brown Act comments in relation to this. And really, it's pretty simple. In order to cure what we consider to be the deficiencies relative to the Brown Act, we ask for 2 or 3 things. One is an immediate release of all comments received. You have them. And an immediate notice of where they can be reviewed. Inclusion of these comments in today's public record for both present and future proceedings, and deferment of agenda item 10A until all of the Brown Act notice requirements and public disclosure obligations have been fully satisfied. Again, I repeat, the public's right to notice, transparency, and informed participation is not a procedural technicality. It is the entire purpose of the Brown Act. So in relation to the work that staff intends to do, they say roughly June 17, I think they're going to come back to this group. We request that a 30-day review period be incorporated into that process, into that schedule. The public has not seen, and we will not have seen, the product as a result of our comments by June 17, unless something changes, and we're asking for a change and consideration in that. So that may defer the approval date, and we simply ask for that courtesy to be able to review the comments that we have made and the staff's response. And we need some time to do that. That doesn't happen overnight any quicker than it does in preparing the implementing guidelines. And then in addition to that, we reiterate some of the things that Andrea said. I don't know where I am on the time, 43 seconds. We reiterate the things that Andrea said about some of the guidelines need tightening up and need to be expanded upon. For example, the opportunity for the jurisdictions to shift funds from local to regional is totally unacceptable without some kind of guidelines, such as maybe a loan, maybe a frequency, maybe an amount. So there are some guidelines that need to be incorporated into this. And I don't believe that would be a violation at all of either the ordinance or the expenditure plan. Thank you very much. Perfect timing.
All right, any other public comments? Anybody online?
Being none online.
Right, very good. Or anything to conclude?
Just, if you have any other questions, I'm just here to answer any questions.
All right, very good. Thank you. And we know if any commissioner or anybody has any questions, we know where to find you. All right, super. Okay, let's go to other items. Let's go to miscellaneous. First of all, let's go to 11A, items from staff.
You know what? I didn't have any, but I thought, you know what, I better put something on there. So you've probably been reading about the federal transportation bill. The federal transportation bill is IIJA. It's got this long name, but we refer to it as IIJA. Expires on September 30th of this year, 2026. And so the Transportation Committee and Infrastructure Committee have been working on trying to develop a new 5-year bill. And this has been in the works for the past year or so. But recently, the committee chair and the ranking member released text of a bipartisan bill. And it's a 5-year reauthorization bill. They're calling it Build America 2050 Act. So that stands for Building and Rebuild or something, Infrastructure and Long-Term Development for America's 250th Act. So they're emphasizing on mobility of goods and people. And that's what the focus is. Tomorrow, there will be they'll be writing up on it, taking comments and kind of going through the bill text. So it is going to be going through various different committees, whether or not it'll be done and approved in time by the, September 30th deadline. Maybe not, maybe. But we will be following this, and we have been following this very closely. There's been some webinars, and I will be joining one on Friday, and there's others that are happening. But what's exciting about it all is it's kind of moving forward to the next movement of it in terms of the write-up of it. And so it's a $580 billion funding bill, and we'll see where, if it's reduced or increased from here on out. And we will be hearing about it on our DC lobbying trip in September. I'm sure of that. So any kind of movement in any way, shape, or form, we will be bringing it forward to you for information. And so that's what I have right as stuff.
And I just have a question on also Transportation Secretary Duffy in regards to the funding that he's requesting all the governors
So
to.
he submitted or sent out a letter to all the governors, and basically it's Drive America, and requesting information on routes listed in your states that you would like to move forward for movement of people and goods and freight movement. And the State Route 99 Coalition has been working with District 6, and we prepared a letter, submitted a letter to District 6 staff and District 10. They will be moving it up up the ladder. I don't know if that goes to CalSTA, it might go to CalSTA first and then the governor's office, but State Route 99 has been approved, not approved, but has been listed as one of the 5 corridors that they are moving forward in the state of California. So this would be for funding, recognized funding for certain projects to move freight. And State Route 99 fits that core category of goods movement safety. And so we are just going to sit tight and see where that moves from here. That letter was submitted yesterday, so we are still waiting to hear back. I'm not sure if you have additional information to share, but Caltrans District 6 has been working with us as partners.
Yeah, we submitted, I think last I heard that number of routes went down, I think to 3, maybe 4, but State Route 99 was on there. So District 6 did submit our justifications up to headquarters. We say 99 did remain on.
And since it was, this all took place yesterday, it will be provided in your agenda package for June as just under consent information items so that you that information available to you.
Very good. Super. Any other comments from staff? If not, items from Caltrans.
Thank you, Chair. I will try to be brief. Touch on AB 1014. We're currently drafting guidance for the implementation. That was the bill that was passed last year with focus on safety. That allows for an additional 5-mile speed reduction. That's on top of the existing 10-mile. So a total of 15-mile speed reduction in identified safety corridors, high pedestrian areas, and commercial corridors. Prior to that, we're limited to the 10. Encampment crews. Caltrans is now employing its own encampment crews to address the unsheltered population in our right-of-way. Those encampment crews are being phased out through California, so I'm happy to say District 6 is in the phase 1. So we anticipate that's going to increase our response time significantly, because up until this point, we've had to rely on contractors to address those needs. So we're going to have 3 crews, 2 in Fresno, 1 in Bakersfield, so we'll be able to service Madera County. We expect that to be up and running by the end of summer. So we're in the hiring process now. Mowing operations, I'm not sure if I addressed that last time. Mowing operations have begun. It's usually only completed once a year because of the cost, the financial cost. We primarily rent our mowers. We do have some moat mowers, but those are usually in basins and off the travel way for the protection of the traveling public in case there's a there. Some innovation. I think this was interesting. We have Caltrans District 6 bought a graffiti drone. So it's a new pilot method for removing graffiti in hard to reach locations, bridges, retaining walls, overhead structures. It's capable of higher pressure washing. It's currently underway. It's expected to improve our response time to address those issues. It's also going to enhance worker safety, reduce the need for lane closures and specialized act for lane closures. And we're going to test it on our District 6 district office to wash the windows, see how that works there. Complete Streets, District 6 is establishing a dedicated 8-person Complete Streets maintenance crew focused on maintaining elements such as crosswalks, sidewalks, ADA ramps, bike lanes, and other pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. The crew is going to be based in Lemoore and will operate as a traveling team supporting Complete Streets infrastructure throughout the entire district. That'll be their primary focus. Again, we expect that crew to be up and running this summer. Some grant information. We still anticipate an award announcement for the Sustainable Transportation Planning grants this month. Active Transportation Cycle Program Cycle 8. Cycle 8 of the State Transportation Program is still open. Applications are due to CTC by June 22nd. Again, we encourage interest to applying. Our staff is available for any assistance. I'll go through some capital projects. South Madera 6 lane widening. That's Avenue 7 to 12. Expect to break ground on that in April of next year. Right?
February.
Is it February? Sorry, it's February. February of next year. Talk to our function special about that. February. So that's what I had in my notes. I misread it. North Madera 6 lane. This is the 17 to 21. We're currently still in the environmental phase and looking at the environmental the VMT mitigation measures is the big hurdle there. The downtown Madera Cap M, we're targeting mid-June. I think our PIO officer is working with your team to coordinate a groundbreaking ceremony. So anticipated to be June. Supervisor McCully would asked about our rehab through Oakhurst. We're going to start the environmental phase in August. But to capture the survey seasons, we have started our biological studies there. So we'll be meeting internally to discuss the Oakhurst mobility study and how we can incorporate that into the complete street elements that are part of that study and kind of marry that with our. That's all I have. Happy to answer any other questions.
Any questions? Right, again, if there's any,
Well, no, not related to this, but to my comment from staff. I failed to mention, we always talk about the Highway Trust Fund and its solvency, and to address the solvency. In that bill, in the write-up of that bill, there is a registration fee for electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. Whether that moves forward or not, there is an amount that's established in the write-up of the bill, starting from, I think, $130 a year annually for electric and like $35 or something for hybrid, and then it caps up for the next few years up to, I think, 150 and 50 or something to that effect. But
yeah, it's interesting that they're proposing that in their bill, and we can't get past first base or to first base, not even past first base here in this state, something like that. But anyway, good. Thanks for mentioning that. Okay. All right, very good. Well, let's go ahead and move on to items from the commissioners, and I'll start to my far right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've already sent my sentiments with our previous commissioners here, Max Rodriguez and Santos Garcia as an alternate, but I also wanted to share the directors retreat that we had on April 30th and May 1st. We had this at the El Capitan in Merced alongside 8 other counties and people that sit on the San Joaquin Regional Policy Council. Myself, Chair Poitras, and our executive director were part of this retreat that really helps us kind of hone into what the needs are for our Central Valley. But I'll leave it at that. I know you have more that you can talk on, and Chair, I think you can touch on that as well. But it was a great retreat. It was good to collaborate and bring ideas. I know towards the end it was coming down to the wire, but it was a really good deal, good exercises that we had for us to be able to, again, find common interest, common ground, things that are important to our valley, such as air, transportation, and the housing needs that we desperately need. So with that, Mr. Chair, that's all I have.
Very good.
I get the team to report that report.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner, for mentioning the retreat. It was, it was really good. I thought it was, the first day we had a competition. I thought it was really
I was going to leave that out.
It was trivia. Somebody up here got first place, but anyway,
he would have challenged it if he didn't.
I wouldn't have challenged. Said who's challenged? Anyway, it was. But no, it was a good time. So it was a good retreat. We're going to actually have a policy council meeting on Friday, I believe, at 8:30. Executive, and I'm going to they'll probably ask about the retreat, and I'm going to actually have to apologize because I felt that the last session was probably the worst handled, and it was one that I was supposed to be chairing. And it was a little bit unorganized, and I found out later on it's because I didn't have the notes that we had put together. Georgina, Vivian, and Tricia and others had really worked on a really nice set of notes to kind of guide the discussion in regards to the road charge. And unfortunately, I didn't have those notes with me, and things kind of went off track very quickly. And it was, anyway, in my opinion, it did not end well. And we really didn't resolve much, and it was mainly because of not having that document, you know, in my hands. So that's going to be something that I still feel really bad about that, but I think it could have been a much better discussion. So I'll take that. I'll take ownership of that. The other thing I was going to mention, he's left already, but I was going to congratulate Dominic Tyberski. He's moving to Ventura to take on a position with Ventura County. And I believe his last day might be Friday, I guess. Yeah, something like that. So anyway, he's done a nice job. He's been with us about a year and a half, came to us from Kings County. And so you may have known him from his days in Kings. Dominic?
I don't. It doesn't
Okay.
sound the bill.
That's all right. You know, it's funny because we ran into some HSR people and they're going, oh, hey, Dominic, oh, you know, everybody seemed to know different things, but anyway, so that's Dominic, but he's left. I think he was becoming emotional, so you don't want to stick around for me to mention it. But maybe not. Maybe he just wanted to leave. So with that, Commissioner, nothing to report. Okay, very good. So now we have an opportunity to move into closed session. This is a public employee performance evaluation of the position of executive director. So what we can do is ask everybody to leave the room except for the commissioners. And then after we've had a discussion, we will bring the executive director back in. And then after that, we will report out of closed session. So
Okay, we'll turn off the camera, we'll mute, and then you can report out, call us back in, we'll turn it back on, and then you can report out.
okay, very good. Thank you.
Muting now.
You can't wait to hit.
All right, very good. All right. Hello, everybody. We're back from closed session and we have no reportable action. So we will adjourn the meeting. Everybody have a great rest of the day. First time I think I've ever done that.
Yeah, back to back meetings.